The floor tiles of my childhood home were imported Italian marble, specifically chosen by my mother because they looked breathtaking in photographs. I know this because my cheek was pressed flat against them, freezing and rigid, as my heart decided to wage a violent war against my own ribcage. It was exactly 42 minutes before the luxury airport shuttle was scheduled to arrive at our pristine suburban driveway. I remember the smell of freshly brewed dark roast espresso lingering in the air, mixing nauseatingly with the heavy, expensive floral perfume my mother bathed herself in before any major social event. Then came the sudden, terrifying flutter. It did not feel like a medical event. It felt like a frantic, trapped bird was locked inside my chest cavity, beating its wings desperately, frantically trying to escape through my sternum. My vision narrowed into a dark, suffocating tunnel. The bright recessed lighting of the kitchen blurred into streaks of blinding white. The marble rushed up to meet my face. I hit the ground with a sickening thud, the impact jarring my teeth. I could not pull air into my lungs. I could not force my vocal cords to make a sound. I could only watch, paralyzed and suffocating, as the polished leather of my father's designer loafers stepped into my limited field of view. He did not drop to his knees. He did not scream my name. He simply paused his pacing. I watched his right foot lift, hover for a fraction of a second, and carefully step entirely over my twitching left arm to avoid scuffing his shoe. "You always ruin things. She will live. Our flight is at 6. He barked the words toward the hallway. His voice did not tremble with the panic of a parent watching their child collapse. It dripped with the pure, unadulterated venom of a man whose perfect itinerary was being threatened by a massive inconvenience. He said it with the casual, cruel annoyance of a man swatting away a persistent fly at a summer barbecue. There was no fear, just rage. I lay there on the cold stone, my heart misfiring in a rapid, chaotic rhythm, feeling the icy grip of unconsciousness creeping into my limbs. I listened to the smooth, quiet wheels of their designer luggage rolling across the hardwood floors toward the front door. They were actually leaving. I could hear my mother humming lightly, probably checking her reflection in the foyer mirror one last time. My sister, Vesper, let out a loud, theatrical sigh, muttering something about my terrible timing and how I was always trying to steal the spotlight. The heavy oak front door opened, letting in a brief rush of warm summer air, and then clicked shut. The lock engaged. They walked out the door and left me dying on the kitchen floor so they would not miss a first-class flight to Vesper's elite engagement gala 3 states away. I am Maeve. I am 34 years old. I build massive mathematical models for a living. I am a corporate risk actuary. I spend my days staring at spreadsheets, calculating exactly how much stress a massive corporate structure can take before it suffers a catastrophic failure. I predict disasters. I quantify liability in the millions of dollars. I am the person a boardroom full of executives listens to when I tell them their foundation is rotten. It is an unbelievably ironic profession for a woman whose own family never once ran the numbers on her. They never once calculated the immense emotional and physical weight they forced me to carry so they could look flawless to the outside world. As the darkness started to claim my peripheral vision, my mind began frantically pulling up old files, flashing back to the countless times I had been pushed aside, minimized, and erased for Vesper. Vesper was the golden child. She was currently a public relations director who spent her days curating fake, glossy smiles for the wealthy elite, doing exactly what our parents had taught her. I remembered my 18th birthday. It was a milestone I had actually looked forward to. I had spent 2 months saving my allowance and working a part-time retail job to plan a small, nice dinner with my 3 closest friends. 3 days before the dinner, my mother sat me down at this very same kitchen island. She told me the dinner was canceled. She explained, with a chillingly calm smile, that Vesper had been invited to a massive charity ball by a prominent local family. Vesper needed a custom-made evening gown to make the right impression. The funds I had saved, along with the money my parents promised for my birthday, were diverted to buy silk and chiffon for my sister. When I dared to let a single tear slip down my face, my father slammed his hand on the counter. He told me to stop being so incredibly dramatic. He told me family sacrifices were necessary for the greater good of our reputation. Then came the college years. I worked 3 exhausting jobs to put myself through a rigorous applied mathematics and economics program. I took grueling overnight shifts stacking boxes, returning to my dorm at dawn to study advanced calculus. I graduated with $80,000 in student loan debt resting squarely on my shoulders. I ate generic ramen noodles and skipped meals for years to aggressively pay it down. On the day I made my final, grueling loan payment, feeling a surge of hard-earned pride, I drove to my parents' house to share the news. I thought, just maybe, they would be proud of my financial independence. I arrived to find a brand new, luxury imported sedan sitting in the driveway. It had a giant, ridiculous red velvet bow sitting on the hood. It was a graduation present for Vesper, who had just barely scraped by with a basic communications degree after partying for 4 years on their dime. I stood in the driveway, looking at the shiny metal that cost more than my entire grueling education, and swallowed the bitter taste of reality. I learned that my achievements were expected, mandatory, and entirely ignored. Vesper's mere existence, however, was a triumph worthy of endless funding. But stepping over my dying body to catch a flight? That was a new baseline of cruelty, even for them. The kitchen grew darker. The last thing I saw was the morning light filtering through the sheer curtains, illuminating the empty space where my family had stood just seconds prior. Someone eventually called emergency services. I learned much later it was our housekeeper who found me when she arrived for her morning shift. If she had hit traffic, if she had been 15 minutes late, I would be a corpse on their Italian marble. As my consciousness faded into a heavy, black void, the sound of the siren approached, screaming through the pristine suburban streets. It was a loud, undeniable siren that shattered the quiet perfection my parents loved so much. What happens to a family built on lies when the designated scapegoat finally stops absorbing the impact? I woke up to a ceiling I did not recognize. It was composed of sterile, white acoustic tiles with harsh, blinding fluorescent lights glaring down at me. But the ceiling was not what grounded me. It was the sound. Beep, beep, beep. It was steady, mechanical, and entirely indifferent to my suffering. I was in a hospital intensive care unit. There was a clear plastic oxygen tube running under my nose, chafing my skin. A massive, painful purple bruise bloomed across the center of my sternum. It throbbed with a deep, sickening ache every time my lungs expanded. It was the physical evidence of where the paramedics had placed the paddles, shocking my misfiring heart back into a viable rhythm. I turned my head slowly, my neck stiff, and aching like I had been in a terrible car crash. The room was bathed in that awful, clinical light. But the most striking thing in the entire room was not the advanced medical equipment or the 4 bags dripping fluids into my veins. It was the chair. The standard issue, uncomfortable vinyl visitor chair sitting in the corner of the room near the small window. It was empty. I lay there for a very long time, listening to my own forced heartbeat echoing from the monitor above my head. I tried to do the math in my head. 18 hours had passed since I collapsed on the kitchen tile. 18 agonizing hours since my father decided his first-class boarding pass was worth infinitely more than my pulse. I slowly reached for my phone, which a kind nurse had placed on the small rolling tray table next to my bed. My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I pressed the screen. I do not know what I was looking for. An apology? A frantic voicemail? A text message begging for an update? A sign that maybe, just maybe, they had turned around at the airport gate when they realized the gravity of what they had done? The screen lit up. 0 missed calls. 0 voicemails. 0 unread text messages addressed to me. My chest tightened, a familiar phantom pain that had undeniably nothing to do with my recent cardiac arrest. Then, a notification popped up at the top of my screen. It was the family group chat. The chat I was still a part of, functioning solely as an audience member for the daily updates about Vesper's fabulous, curated life. I clicked the notification, my thumb hovering over the screen. A photograph had just loaded into the chat. It was Vesper. She was standing in a breathtakingly lavish hotel suite, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. She was wearing a designer silk dress that hugged her perfectly, her hair styled into flawless, expensive waves. The lighting in the room was warm and golden. She looked radiant, glowing, and entirely unbothered by the fact that she had stepped over her dying sister hours prior. Underneath the photograph was a caption typed by Rowena. Our golden girl heading to her VIP gala. Minor hiccups at home will not stop our joy. Cheers to the beautiful couple. Minor hiccups at home. That was me. My heart stopping. My body hitting the hard floor. The paramedics tearing my shirt open and shocking my chest to bring me back from the brink of absolute death. I was a minor hiccup. A slight, annoying inconvenience on their way to a champagne toast and luxury hors d'oeuvres. I stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred into a meaningless string of pixels. I was a 34-year-old woman making a high six-figure salary. I commanded respect in massive corporate boardrooms full of intimidating, ruthless executives. Yet here I was, reduced to a minor hiccup in a family group chat. I put the phone face down on the tray. I did not cry. I had trained myself out of crying decades ago. Crying in my household was always labeled as a performance, a manipulation tactic. If I shed a tear, I was being dramatic. If I showed pain, I was seeking attention. So I became a fortress of cold logic and hard numbers. But logic could not explain the hollow, crushing ache spreading through my ribs. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be useful to them. I paid for expensive family dinners at restaurants I did not even like. I spent hours helping Thaddeus review his complex business contracts because I understood risk assessment and liability clauses far better than his expensive, lazy lawyers. I thought if I just provided enough undeniable value, I would earn my place at their table. I was treating my family like a critical corporate client, hoping for a return on my massive investment of time, money, and love. But the ledger was always unbalanced. I was pouring assets into a black hole. A nurse walked into the room. She was an older woman with gentle eyes and soft, careful hands. She checked my monitors, silenced an alarm, wrote something down on her clipboard, and then looked over at the empty vinyl chair in the corner. I saw the deep pity swimming in her eyes, and I hated it. I hated being the tragic patient with the empty room. Is there anyone we can call for you, Maeve? She asked softly, her voice full of genuine concern. A partner? A friend? Your parents? I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my dry throat like sandpaper. I could not say their names. I could not give them the dignity of being my emergency contacts when they were currently sipping expensive champagne 3 states away, celebrating a minor hiccup. I looked at the nurse, feeling a profound, crushing sense of isolation. I was completely alone in the world. Or so I thought. Who do you call when the people who gave you life are the ones most willing to let you lose it on a kitchen floor? I need an emergency contact for your medical file, the nurse repeated gently, bringing me back to the sterile, terrifying reality of the intensive care unit. Someone who can make critical decisions if things go south again. Things going south. A very polite, sanitized medical term for dying. I closed my eyes, searching my exhausted mind for a name to give her. And then, a memory hit me with the force of a physical blow to the stomach. It was a memory from 6 years ago. The ghost of the year 2020. I had experienced a terrifying episode of rapid heartbeat in my small, one-bedroom apartment. I was alone, terrified, and convinced my chest was going to literally explode from the pressure. I drove myself to the emergency room in the middle of the night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When the intake nurse at the front desk asked me for my emergency contact, I froze. Even then, sitting in the agonizing pain of a potential cardiac event, a deep, primal part of my brain knew my parents would be furious if I woke them up. They would undoubtedly call it a panic attack. They would scream at me for ruining their sleep schedule. So, sitting in that harsh fluorescent waiting room at 3 in the morning, shivering in a thin paper gown, I dialed the only number I knew would actually answer the call. Lachlan. Lachlan is my older brother. He is 3 years older than me. He is a man built of broad shoulders, heavily calloused hands, and a quiet, simmering intensity that makes people step out of his way. He runs a massive custom heavy-duty truck and supercar maintenance shop on the industrial side of the city. He smells of motor oil, sawdust, and strong black coffee. He is a stark, jarring contrast to the sterile, manicured perfection of our parents' home. 6 years ago, Lachlan finally had enough of the abuse. During a disastrous, tense Thanksgiving dinner, Thaddeus had demanded Lachlan co-sign a massive, high-risk business loan for Vesper. Vesper was starting her first attempt at a public relations firm, despite having no business plan and zero clients. Lachlan refused. He looked our father dead in the eye across the turkey and the expensive crystal glasses and said he was done. He was done being the family bank account. He was done being the family mule. Thaddeus exploded into a terrifying rage. He threw a wine glass against the wall. He told Lachlan to get out and never, ever come back. The family excised him like a tumor. They cut him out of photographs. They never spoke his name again. But that terrible night in the emergency room 6 years ago, Lachlan answered my call on the second ring. He drove an hour and a half in the dead of night, breaking several speed limits, to sit with me. He sat in the uncomfortable chair, held my hand, and stared down any doctor who tried to rush me out. And, before I was discharged that morning, terrified that something worse might happen to me in the future and I would be left to the mercy of my parents, I asked the hospital administration for a specific piece of legal paperwork. An advance directive and medical power of attorney form. I filled it out with a shaking hand, naming Lachlan as the sole person authorized to make medical decisions for me if I became incapacitated. I signed it, got it witnessed by a notary in the hospital, and filed it into the state medical registry. Then, life happened. I got incredibly busy climbing the corporate ladder, Lachlan got busy expanding his massive shop, and we drifted apart, speaking only occasionally on holidays. I had entirely forgotten about that dusty piece of paper buried deep in the hospital archives. Until right now. I opened my eyes and looked at the waiting nurse. "My brother," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "Lachlan. He is my legally designated medical proxy." I reached for my phone and dialed his number from memory. It had been nearly 8 months since we last spoke. I expected it to go straight to voicemail. I expected the universe to remind me that I truly was abandoned, that relying on anyone was a mathematical error. The phone rang once. Then a gruff, deep voice answered over the loud hum of machinery. "Maeve? What is wrong?" He did not say hello. He did not ask how my day was going. He heard the time of day, saw my name on the caller ID, and knew immediately that something was profoundly broken. "I am in the hospital, Lachlan," I whispered, the fortress of cold logic finally showing a tiny, hairline crack. My heart stopped. They left. I did not need to explain who they were. I did not need to explain the context of the flight or the gala. Lachlan breathed in sharply through his nose. The loud sound of metal clanging echoed through the phone as he dropped a wrench, followed by a heavy, dark curse. "Which hospital?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. I told him the name of the cardiac center. "I am leaving the shop right now. I will be there in 40 minutes. Do not sign anything. Do not talk to them if they call you. I am coming, Maeve. I got you." The line went dead. I set the phone down on the tray table. A strange, unfamiliar sensation washed over me. It was not relief, exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you finally find solid, unmoving ground after falling through the dark for a very long time. Lachlan was coming. The exiled son, the rough mechanic my parents utterly despised, was rushing toward the hospital to stand guard. I did not know it yet, but that old, forgotten piece of legal paper I signed 6 years ago was about to become a devastating guillotine for my family's perfect reputation. The bear trap was set in the woods, and my parents were blindly, arrogantly wandering right into it. What happens when the black sheep of the family holds all the legal power over the golden child's perfect weekend? Lachlan arrived at my room exactly 38 minutes later. I heard his heavy, steel-toed work boots thudding down the quiet hospital hallway long before I actually saw him. He filled the entire doorway of the hospital room, a massive, imposing figure blocking out the light from the corridor. He was wearing faded, oil-stained denim jeans and a dark gray work shirt with his shop's custom logo stitched over the left chest pocket. There were dark grease stains deeply embedded in his knuckles and forearms. He looked entirely out of place in the sterile, pristine white environment of the cardiac intensive care unit. He was a sharp, glaring contrast to the tailored designer suits and imported silk blouses my family constantly draped themselves in to project success. He took one long look at me. He looked at the pale, cheap hospital gown. He looked at the thick wires snaking across my chest to the monitor. He stared at the violent, ugly purple burn mark on my sternum where the defibrillator paddles had scorched my skin. His square jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might literally crack under the pressure. He did not say a single word. He walked over with heavy, deliberate steps, pulled the empty vinyl visitor chair right up to the metal rail of my bed, and sat down heavily. He reached out and wrapped his large, incredibly rough hand around my cold, trembling fingers. The heat of his grip anchored me to the room. It was the first human touch I had received in 18 hours that was not checking my pulse or injecting a needle. "They actually left," he said. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. It was a statement of fact, not a question. "They had a flight to catch," I replied, my tone flat, stripped of all emotion, presenting the data just as it was. "Vespers Gala. First-class tickets." Lachlan let out a harsh, dark, humorless laugh that held zero amusement. "Of course. Heaven forbid Vesper misses a chance to drink free vintage champagne and take selfies while her sister is strapped to a cardiac defibrillator." While Lachlan was talking to the attending nurse near the door, pulling out his driver's license to confirm his legal status as my medical proxy, my phone vibrated intensely on the metal tray table. It was an alert from Instagram. I swiped the screen with my free hand. Vesper had just posted a brand new update to her 40,000 followers. It was a carefully staged picture of her looking exquisitely melancholic, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling window of a luxury hotel room, holding a single, perfect white rose against her cheek. The caption underneath was a masterclass in manipulative public relations. "Trying to stay positive and focused during my special engagement week. It is so incredibly hard when toxic family members try to steal your joy and sabotage your big life moments with desperate, dramatic cries for attention. Praying for peace in my heart and focusing on the light. Hashtag engagement gala. Hashtag setting boundaries. Hashtag drama-free zone. Hashtag choosing joy." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bone marrow. A desperate cry for attention. Sabotage. She was actively, intentionally spinning my near-fatal cardiac arrest into a public relations narrative where she was the long-suffering victim. I scrolled down the screen. The comments were flooding in by the dozens. My Aunt Juniper, my mother's notoriously gossipy sister, commented first, "You are so strong, sweetie. Do not let her ruin your magical week. She always pulls these stunts when the spotlight is not on her." Declan, Vesper's wealthy fiancé, replied with 3 red heart emojis and a praying hands emoji. Scores of flying monkeys, relatives, family friends, and country club acquaintances who worshipped the ground my parents walked on were chiming in to offer Vesper their deepest sympathy for having such a difficult, toxic, attention-seeking sister. Lachlan finished with the nurse and noticed the drastic change in my breathing pattern. He leaned over the bed rails and looked directly at the glowing screen. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of dark red. He stood up abruptly, knocking the vinyl chair back so hard it hit the wall. "Give me the phone, Maeve," he growled, reaching his massive hand out for the device. "I am going to tear her apart online right now. I am going to take a picture of you lying here with literal burn marks on your chest and tag every single one of her wealthy little PR clients. I will burn her business to the ground before lunch." I grabbed his wrist. My grip was physically weak, but my eyes were intensely focused. The analytical, calculating part of my brain, the corporate actuary who managed multi-million-dollar crisis scenarios, suddenly snapped back online. I saw the board. I saw the pieces moving. Vesper was playing a very short-term emotional game. She wanted a public, messy fight. She wanted to look like the reasonable, aggrieved, classy party dealing with a crazy, jealous sister and a volatile, exiled brother. "No," I said firmly, holding his gaze. Do not engage. Maeve, look at what she is saying to thousands of people. She is telling the world you faked a massive heart attack because you are jealous of a ring. I know, I said, my voice eerily calm, the numbers aligning in my head. But you do not fight public relations with public relations, Lachlan. That is her home territory. She controls the narrative there. We fight them with hard data. We fight them with irrefutable facts. We let them build their arrogant house of cards as high as they possibly want, and then we pull the concrete foundation straight out from under them. Lachlan stared at me, his raw anger slowly giving way to a grim, terrifying understanding. He recognized the look in my eyes. It was the look I got right before I found a fatal flaw in a corporate ledger. He slowly picked up the chair and sat back down. Okay, what is the actual play, Maeve? We wait, I said. We secure the perimeter of this room. We find out exactly what went wrong with my heart. And we make sure that when they finally come back down from their VIP cloud on Thursday, they crash straight into a legal brick wall. Just then, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. A doctor walked in. She was a tall woman with sharp, intelligent features and an intense, highly focused gaze. Her hospital badge read Dr. Freya, head of cardiology. She was not holding a sleek digital tablet or a modern medical chart. She was holding a thick, worn, yellowing manila folder. It looked ancient. Maeve, Dr. Freya said, her voice completely devoid of the usual cheerful, comforting bedside manner. We need to have a very serious, very difficult conversation about your medical past. What the hell was in that dusty old folder? And how was it about to change the trajectory of my entire existence? Dr. Freya pulled a small, rolling metal stool to the side of my bed and sat down. She placed the ancient, thick manila folder directly on my rolling tray table. The edges of the paper were curled, frayed, and brittle with age. Across the top tab, written in faded black ink, was my full name, my date of birth, and a specific year. The year I was exactly 9 years old. Lachlan leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting heavily on his knees, his dark eyes locked onto the folder like it was alive, ticking explosive device. When you were admitted by the paramedics yesterday morning, Dr. Freya began, her tone measured, clinical, and devastatingly precise. Your heart was in a state of ventricular fibrillation. It is a very severe, highly dangerous arrhythmia where the lower chambers quiver instead of pumping blood. While reviewing the electrical rhythm strip the paramedics printed, I noticed a very distinct, unusual pattern. I immediately requested a deep dive into the state pediatric cardiology archives. This file arrived by secure courier from the central storage facility an hour ago. She opened the heavy folder. Inside were old, jagged electrocardiogram printouts, the kind printed on thin, grid-lined thermal paper that smelled like old dust. When you were 9 years old, Maeve, did you ever faint? Did you have episodes where you collapsed without warning? I nodded slowly, the distant memory surfacing through a thick haze of decades of gaslighting. Yes, I fainted during a crowded school assembly in the auditorium. And once again during gym class while running the track. My parents told everyone, including the school nurse, that I was just hyperventilating. They said I was highly sensitive, that I got overwhelmed easily by crowds. They told the school administration I was dramatic and acting out. You were not dramatic, Dr. Freya stated, her voice slicing through the heavy air of the room like a surgical scalpel. You were experiencing extremely dangerous cardiac events. At age 9, following the incident at the school assembly, you were referred to a specialist. A pediatric cardiologist. He ran a battery of tests. The results are right here in this file. She turned the brittle page, revealing a formally typed medical report signed by a doctor whose name I did not recognize at all. You were diagnosed with long QT syndrome, she explained calmly. It is a severe electrical disorder of the heart. It causes fast, chaotic heartbeats that can lead to sudden fainting, seizures, or even sudden cardiac death. However, it is very treatable. It is managed with daily medication called beta blockers and, in severe cases, an implanted defibrillator device. The specialist who saw you heavily recommended immediate daily medication and close, regular monitoring. I stared at the dense medical jargon printed on the page. But I never took any medication. I never took a single pill. We never went back to that doctor's office. I know, Dr. Freya said softly. The strict clinical detachment in her professional voice fractured just a tiny bit. She turned to the very last page in the thick folder. It was a standard, state-issued medical consent and refusal form. This is a formal, legal refusal of recommended life-saving medical treatment, she said. I looked down at the yellowing page. There, at the very bottom of the document, were two unmistakable signatures. Thaddeus's sharp, aggressive, slashing scrawl. And right next to it, Rowena's elegant, perfectly looping cursive. But it was not just a signature authorizing the refusal. My mother had taken the time to write a specific note in the designated comment section at the bottom. I leaned in, my vision blurring with a sudden, massive surge of adrenaline. I read the words written in blue ink 25 years ago. Child is well. We do not want her labeled. Child is well. We do not want her labeled. The words echoed in the sterile, quiet room. They echoed inside my skull. They echoed through 25 agonizing years of being told I was a drama queen, a fragile burden, a child who faked fainting spells to steal attention from Vesper. My parents knew. They sat in a specialist's office, listened to a highly trained doctor tell them their 9-year-old daughter had a potentially fatal heart condition, and they looked at each other and decided that having a medically flawed child would ruin their perfect, curated family aesthetic. Taking daily medication would be a permanent label. It would mean they were not genetically perfect. So they signed a piece of paper, dragged me home, and actively gambled with my life every single day for 2.5 decades, all to protect their pristine suburban image at the country club. They gaslit me into believing my actual, terrifying physical suffering was a massive character flaw. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt a cold, hard, dense knot form in the pit of my stomach. It was not sorrow. It was not grief over a lost childhood. It was an absolute, terrifying clarity. The corporate risk actuary looked at the ultimate life ledger. The betrayal was finally quantified, and the numbers were staggering. Lachlan stood up so fast his chair skidded backward. He turned away from the bed, his broad shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. He drove his grease-stained fist into the cinder-block wall of the hospital room with a sickening, heavy thud that rattled the medical monitors. He did not yell. The quiet, dark fury radiating from his massive frame was far more terrifying than any loud shout. They knew, Lachlan whispered to the plaster wall, his voice breaking. Every single time you collapsed on the floor. Every time Dad yelled at you to get up and stop embarrassing them in public. They knew they were watching you die. Dr. Freya slowly closed the folder, her face pale. As a medical professional, finding a document like this changes the hospital protocol significantly. Refusing life-saving treatment for a minor and continuing to actively obscure that critical medical history into adulthood crosses a severe ethical and legal line. I looked up at Dr. Freya. The tears I refused to shed dried up completely in my eyes. My voice was steady, hard, and sharp as flint. What do we do now, doctor? Now, a new, authoritative voice said from the open doorway, we bring in the full weight of the law. A woman in a sharp navy blazer, holding a digital tablet, stepped confidently into the room. How do you legally trap a family that genuinely thinks they're invincible? I am Nola, the woman in the navy blazer said, stepping fully into the hospital room and closing the heavy wooden door firmly behind her. Her demeanor was entirely no nonsense. She projected an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. I am the head of this hospital's clinical social work and patient advocacy department. Dr. Freya briefed me extensively on the contents of your pediatric file 10 minutes ago. Nola pulled up a second chair and placed it next to Lachlan, who was currently nursing his bruised, red knuckles, his dark eyes burning with a vengeful fire that mirrored my own cold calculations. Maeve, I am going to be very direct with you, Nola began, setting her tablet flat on her lap and looking me straight in the eyes. What your parents did 25 years ago is not just a simple difference in parenting philosophy or a misunderstanding of medical jargon. by willfully denying you diagnosed, strictly necessary cardiac treatment to avoid a social label, and by continuously, actively gaslighting you into adulthood about your heart condition, they engaged in severe medical child abuse and neglect. Furthermore, when that decades-long neglect culminates in a life-threatening cardiac arrest where they actively abandon you on a floor to board an airplane, we cross the threshold into criminal negligence and reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult. I absorbed the heavy legal words. Criminal negligence. Reckless endangerment. Child abuse. For 34 years, Thaddeus and Rowena had operated under the arrogant assumption that they were the ultimate authority in the universe. They believed they were entirely immune to consequences because they had substantial money, a massive house, and a golden child who smiled perfectly for the cameras. They think they are untouchable, I said quietly, stating a calculated fact. They think they are coming back here next Thursday to sweep this entire incident under the rug, pay the hospital bill, and yell at me for ruining Vesper's precious engagement trip. They're in for a very, very rude awakening, Nola replied, her lips pressing into a thin, grim line. But to proceed with the legal mechanisms available to us, I need to know your exact stance. Many patients in your position, bound by years of systemic psychological abuse and financial manipulation, choose to protect the family unit. They ask us to seal the file, discharge them, and let the family take them home. I need to know, definitively, if you are ready to sever the cord. I looked at the ancient, yellowing manila folder sitting on the tray table. I thought about the $80,000 student loan I paid off while eating ramen. I thought about the canceled birthdays and the stolen funds. I thought about Thaddeus deliberately stepping over my twitching arm, prioritizing his Italian leather shoes over my failing heart. I thought about Vesper drinking vintage champagne in a luxury suite and publicly calling my near-death experience a desperate plea for attention. The corporate actuary calculated the final numbers on the spreadsheet of my life. The liability column was overflowing. The asset column was completely worthless. It was time to aggressively liquidate the account. Sever it, I said, my voice not shaking even a fraction of an inch. Sever it all. Burn the bridge. Nola nodded, her eyes flashing with a fierce, professional satisfaction. She tapped a few times on her digital tablet and handed it across the bed rail to me. This is a comprehensive revocation of access and a strict privacy lockdown form, Nola explained, pointing to the digital signature line. By signing this document, you are legally stripping Thaddeus and Rowena of any and all rights to your medical information. They cannot view your chart. They cannot speak to your doctors or nurses. And they certainly cannot authorize your discharge from this facility. Furthermore, this document officially reaffirms Lachlan as your sole, uncontested medical proxy. I took the digital stylus. My hand did not shake. I signed my full legal name with a fluid, incredibly decisive stroke. Done, Nola said, taking the tablet back and locking the screen. I am also filing an immediate, mandatory report with State Adult Protective Services based on the historical pediatric documentation and the documented events of Tuesday morning. A dedicated caseworker will be assigned to your file today. There will be a formal state investigation. They fly back on Thursday, I said, checking the calendar app on my phone. That is 5 days from now. They texted me this morning before the flight took off. Thaddeus said they are coming straight to the hospital from the airport to sign me out and take me home. Lachlan leaned over the metal bed rail, a dark, truly terrifying grin slowly spreading across his face. It was the smile of an apex predator that had just quietly locked the steel cage door from the outside, trapping its prey inside. Let them come, Lachlan rumbled, his voice thick with anticipation. Let them walk right up to the front desk in their expensive suits thinking they own the place. I want to see his arrogant face when he hits the brick wall. For the first time in 9 days, for the first time in my entire 34 years of existence, I did not feel like a victim. I did not feel like the designated family scapegoat. I felt like the architect of their total destruction. The trap was meticulously set. The legal documents were locked in the system. The medical evidence was secured in a vault. The glossy public relations spin Vesper was building online was about to collide head-on with a massive freight train of criminal documentation. They were enjoying their first-class luxury vacation, sipping champagne at 30,000 feet, completely unaware that their empire of lies was already burning to the ground. Thank you for watching until the end of part 2 of the story. If you're feeling smug because the trap has been set, please leave a comment with the keyword "I'm win." This is our secret signal for those of us who have patiently watched this far. I will like and reply to every comment containing the keyword "I'm win." Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the moment this toxic family gets their comeuppance in the next parts. Thursday was rapidly approaching. The day the self-proclaimed VIPs would finally return from their trip. They were planning to march into the hospital lobby and claim me like an abandoned suitcase at baggage claim. They had no idea the locks had been changed, and the person holding the only key was the son they had thrown away like trash. What exactly happens when an arrogant father tries to order around a hospital administration that has already reported him for criminal neglect? The hospital room was a terrifyingly quiet place when the machines were not sounding alarms. Over the next 2 days, my life was measured entirely by the steady, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor and the soft padding of nurses' rubber shoes against the linoleum floor. Lachlan had transformed the small corner of my room into his personal command center. He brought his laptop, managing his massive truck repair shop from the uncomfortable vinyl chair, pausing only to force me to drink water or eat the bland hospital food. The legal and medical trap we had set alongside Nola and Dr. Freya was fully armed, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for Thursday. But toxic families do not simply wait in silence. When they cannot win by abandoning you, they try to win by rewriting the narrative and exhausting you into submission. The psychological warfare began on Wednesday afternoon. It started with a phone call that managed to bypass the front desk because it came directly to my personal cell phone. I was staring at the ceiling, trying to mentally calculate the structural integrity of the hospital's concrete pillars just to keep my mind occupied, when my screen lit up. The caller ID displayed the name Aunt Juniper. She was my mother Rowena's older sister, the undisputed gossip queen of their wealthy suburban country club, and the primary general of my mother's army of flying monkeys. Lachlan looked up from his laptop, his eyes narrowing at the screen. He reached out to press the red decline button, but I stopped him. I shook my head, took a deep breath, and slid my thumb across the green icon. Before I put the phone to my ear, I tapped the record button on my screen. I was a corporate risk actuary. I never entered a hostile negotiation without documenting every single spoken word. Maeve, Aunt Juniper's voice shrilled through the speaker. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my heart was doing. She spoke with the frantic, highly offended tone of a woman whose incredibly important brunch had been interrupted. I just got off the phone with your mother. She is absolutely beside herself. She is practically in tears in her hotel suite. I stared blankly at the beige wall of my room. Is she crying because I nearly died on her kitchen floor, Juniper? I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. Juniper scoffed loudly, a harsh sound of pure disbelief. Oh, please stop with the theatrics, Maeve. We all know you have a tendency to exaggerate. Your mother told me you had a little fainting spell because you were jealous of all the attention Vesper was getting for her engagement. But that is not even the point right now. The point is that you are completely ruining the mood of this trip. A little fainting spell. I looked down at the massive, ugly purple burn marking the exact spot where the paramedics had blasted thousands of volts of electricity into my chest to force my heart to beat again. They're trying to celebrate Vesper, Juniper continued, her voice gaining a vicious momentum. Vesper is a nervous wreck because she knows you are sitting in a hospital bed playing the victim, trying to make everyone feel guilty for going on a trip they paid a fortune for. Do you have any idea how much stress you are putting on your sister during what is supposed to be the happiest week of her life? I remained perfectly silent, letting the audio recorder capture every single toxic, delusional syllable she was spitting at me. Since you have clearly caused immense emotional distress to Vesper and your parents, your mother, and I had a long talk, Juniper said, her tone suddenly shifting to a cold, businesslike demand. Vesper's wedding is going to be incredibly expensive. Her public relations firm is just starting to take off, and she needs this wedding to be a major networking event. We all agree that the absolute least you can do to make up for ruining her engagement week with this hospital stunt is to cover the catering costs for the reception. It is $30,000. Consider it emotional compensation for the stress you have caused the family. Lachlan, who could hear the tinny voice leaking from the phone speaker, stopped typing. He stared at me in pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw dropped. $30,000. My aunt, acting as a proxy for my mother, was actively attempting to extort $30,000 from me while I was strapped to a cardiac monitor in an intensive care unit. They were demanding I fund a luxury wedding as an apology for having the audacity to suffer a life-threatening medical emergency on their floor. The sheer, staggering audacity of the demand was almost scientifically fascinating. If this were a corporate entity, I would recommend immediate dissolution. I did not scream. I did not cry. The 9-year-old girl who used to beg for their love was completely dead. The woman holding the phone was a master of calculating catastrophic loss. $30,000, I repeated slowly, clearly, ensuring the microphone caught the exact number. You want me to transfer $30,000 to Vesper for catering, to compensate for the emotional damage of my cardiac arrest. Exactly, Juniper said, sounding immensely relieved that I was being so compliant and reasonable. If you wire the money to her account today, your parents are willing to overlook this whole dramatic episode. They will fly back tomorrow afternoon, come to the hospital, sign your discharge papers, and take you home. We can just put this ugly mess behind us. I see, I replied softly. Thank you for making the family's position so incredibly clear, Juniper. I have recorded this entire conversation for my records. Have a wonderful day. I hung up the phone before she could formulate a single sound of protest. I saved the audio file to 3 separate cloud servers. Lachlan was shaking his head, a dark, terrifying chuckle rumbling in his chest. $30,000, Lachlan muttered, running his grease-stained hands through his hair. They are literally trying to charge you a fee for dying. They are so completely detached from reality that they think they can buy their way out of a criminal neglect charge with catering money. Just as he spoke, a new text message chimed on my screen. It was from Thaddeus. We land at 2 in the afternoon tomorrow. Coming straight to the hospital from the airport to sign you out and take you home. Have your bags packed. Stop this embarrassing tantrum immediately. We are done playing games. I looked at the text message. I looked at the audio file of Juniper's extortion attempt. I looked at Lachlan. He is right about one thing, I said, my voice as cold as the Italian marble I had collapsed on. We are definitely done playing games. Thursday arrived with a heavy, suffocating summer heat that seeped through the thick glass windows of the hospital. It was my 9th day in the cardiac intensive care unit. The ambient temperature outside was brutal, but inside the hospital walls, the air conditioning kept everything crisp, sterile, and freezing cold. I sat propped up in my bed, wearing a fresh hospital gown that the kind nurse had brought me. My hair was combed. I was hooked up to the monitors, but I was fully awake, incredibly alert, and terrifyingly calm. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 in the afternoon. Then 3. I knew they were in the city. I knew they were making their way through traffic, riding in a luxury black car service, undoubtedly complaining about the heat and the inconvenience of having to visit a hospital before going to their pristine suburban mansion. Lachlan was not sitting in the vinyl chair. He had deliberately moved to the far corner of the room, standing completely out of sight from the doorway, enveloped in the shadows near the bathroom. He stood with his arms crossed over his massive chest, his jaw set in stone. We had coordinated this exactly like a corporate ambush. At 3:45, the heavy, imposing silence of the hallway was abruptly shattered. I heard them long before I saw them. My family never just entered a room, they invaded it. It is absolutely ridiculous that we have to come all the way down to this wing, my father's booming, authoritative voice echoed down the corridor. I told her to have her things ready. We are not staying for more than 10 minutes. I have a major conference call at 5. Just be gentle, Thaddeus, my mother's voice fluttered, trying to sound soothing, but failing to hide her deep irritation. You know how she gets when she wants attention. Just smile, sign whatever ridiculous forms they want, and let us get her out of here so Vesper can finally relax. Then came a third voice, lighter, whiny, and completely self-absorbed. It was Vesper. I still cannot believe she would not just wire the catering money. Juniper said she hung up on her. It is so incredibly selfish. Declan and I are so stressed. A deeper, unfamiliar male voice murmured something placating. That must be Declan, the wealthy fiancé, dragged along to witness the family taking out the trash. They turned the corner and appeared in the doorway. It was a visual assault. They looked like they had just walked off a private yacht in the Mediterranean. Thaddeus was wearing a crisp linen suit, a pair of expensive designer sunglasses hooked casually into the collar of his shirt. Rowena looked flawless in a white silk sundress, her skin baked to a perfect, wealthy golden tan. Vesper was wearing a massive diamond ring that caught the harsh fluorescent light, her arm hooked tightly through the arm of a tall, handsome man in a polo shirt, Declan. They stood in the doorway of the intensive care unit, glowing with health and luxury, while I lay in a hospital bed with wires physically stitched into my chest. The contrast was so sharp, so brutally ironic, it almost made me laugh. Thaddeus stepped into the room first. He had a gold pen already clicking in his right hand. He did not look at the monitors. He did not look at the purple burn on my chest. He looked at me with the weary exasperation of a manager dealing with a problematic employee. "All right, Maeve," Thaddeus said loudly, clapping his hands together once. "Vacation is over. We are here. Let us get you discharged. Where is the paperwork? I need to sign you out and get back to the office." He strode purposefully toward the side of my bed, completely ignoring the fact that I was attached to a dozen life-saving machines. Before he could reach the tray table, the head nurse stepped directly into his path. She was a formidable woman with 30 years of experience dealing with arrogant families. She planted her feet firmly, crossing her arms, creating an impenetrable human barricade between my father and my bed. "Excuse me, sir," the head nurse said, her voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You need to step back. You cannot be in this patient's personal space." Thaddeus stopped, blinking in genuine confusion. He looked at the nurse as if she were a piece of malfunctioning equipment. "I am her father. I am here to sign her discharge papers and take her home. Now, please step aside and hand me the clipboard." "There is no clipboard for you, sir," the nurse replied, her gaze unwavering. "And there is certainly no discharge today. The patient is under strict cardiac observation." Thaddeus's face began to flush a deep, angry red. His authority was being questioned by someone he deemed a subordinate. "Listen to me very carefully. I am paying the insurance premiums. I am the head of this family. I am authorizing her release right now. If you do not move, I am going to call the hospital administrator and have your job." "You can call whoever you like," the head nurse stated, entirely unbothered by his empty threats. "You have zero legal authority on this floor. You are strictly barred from accessing any of this patient's medical information, and you absolutely cannot sign her out." Rowena gasped, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. "What do you mean we are barred? We are her parents. We have been her family for 34 years. This is a complete misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," the nurse said flatly. "The patient has explicitly revoked your access. Furthermore, she has a legally binding medical power of attorney on file. The only person who can authorize any decisions regarding her care is her designated medical proxy." Thaddeus laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound of pure disbelief. "A medical proxy? What absolute nonsense is this, Maeve? Who on earth did you manipulate into signing?" He trailed off. From the dark corner of the room, near the bathroom door, a massive figure stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light. Lachlan walked forward, his heavy steel-toed boots making slow, deliberate, terrifying sounds against the floor. He stopped right next to the nurse, towering over Thaddeus. He was still wearing his grease-stained work shirt. He looked like an absolute force of nature. "Hello, Dad," Lachlan rumbled, his voice dark and deadly quiet. I watched the blood completely drain from Thaddeus's perfectly tanned face. He went stark white. Rowena let out a genuine, high-pitched sound of terror. Vesper took a physical step backward, bumping into Declan. "Lachlan," Thaddeus breathed, his voice suddenly weak, hollow, and devoid of all its previous booming arrogance. 6 years ago, you told me to get out of your house and never come back, Lachlan said, stepping closer, forcing our father to tilt his head up to maintain eye contact. You cut me out because I refused to fund your precious golden child. But you forgot something. I never left Maeve. Thaddeus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine, and he had already heard the click. I am the medical proxy, Lachlan stated, crossing his massive, tattooed arms. I make the calls. You do not sign anything. You do not take her anywhere. You do not even get to know what medication she is on. You have absolutely no power here. The son you threw away is in charge now. The silence that followed was absolute. The great, untouchable patriarch of the family had just been legally completely neutered by the very son he despised. But the ambush was only half complete. The real execution was about to begin. The shock in the room was palpable, hanging in the air like thick smoke. Thaddeus was visibly trembling, his knuckles white as he gripped his gold pen. He looked desperately around the room, trying to find an angle, a loophole, a way to reassert the dominance he had wielded for 3 decades. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to stop this humiliation, to step in and fix the mess, to absorb the impact like I always did. I stared right back at him, my face a mask of absolute, unyielding stone. I did not offer a single word of comfort. Before Thaddeus could formulate a counterattack, the door to the hallway opened wider. Dr. Freya and Nola, the head clinical social worker, stepped into the room. They moved with military precision. Nola was holding her digital tablet, and Dr. Freya was holding the thick, yellowing manila folder. Mr. and Mrs. Young, Nola said, her voice projecting absolute, undeniable authority. I am Nola, the head of clinical social work for this facility. We need to have a very serious discussion regarding the events of last Tuesday and the historical medical records we recently uncovered. Thaddeus immediately went on the defensive, raising his hands. Listen, whatever she told you, she is exaggerating. My daughter has a history of severe anxiety and dramatic episodes. We left her in the care of professionals because we had non-refundable tickets for a vital family event. It was a simple miscommunication. A miscommunication, Dr. Freya repeated. She walked past Thaddeus and placed the ancient manila folder on my tray table. She opened it under the bright lights. Is that what you call ignoring a diagnosed, life-threatening cardiac condition for 25 years? Rowena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The flawless facade of the wealthy suburban socialite cracked, revealing the terrified, guilty woman underneath. Vesper looked wildly between our parents and the doctors, clearly not understanding what was happening. Declan, the fiancé, frowned deeply, his posture shifting from supportive to highly suspicious. I do not know what you are talking about, Thaddeus lied, though his voice wavered. She has always been perfectly healthy. Just sensitive. Dr. Freya did not argue. She simply picked up the final piece of paper in the folder. It was the refusal of treatment form. She turned it around so it faced Thaddeus, Rowena, Vesper, and Declan. This is a state pediatric cardiology record from 25 years ago, Dr. Freya stated loudly and clearly. When Maeve was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with long QT syndrome. It is a severe, potentially fatal electrical disorder of the heart. The specialist highly recommended immediate, daily medication to prevent sudden cardiac death. Dr. Freya pointed directly to the bottom of the page. These are your signatures, legally refusing that life-saving treatment. And this, she tapped the blue ink, is the handwritten note your wife left in the comment section. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft whir of the air conditioning unit. Dr. Freya read the words aloud, her clinical voice completely destroying my parents' lies. Child is well. We do not want her labeled. Declan inhaled sharply. He dropped Vesper's arm and took a physical step away from the family. He stared at Thaddeus and Rowena as if they had suddenly grown horns. He was looking at monsters. You refused to treat a fatal heart condition in your 9-year-old child because you were worried about a social label, Nola added, stepping forward. You allowed her to collapse repeatedly throughout her childhood, blaming her for being dramatic to hide your own medical neglect. And last Tuesday, when that untreated condition finally culminated in a massive cardiac arrest, you literally stepped over her dying body on your kitchen floor to catch a first-class flight to a party. Thaddeus was sweating now. The pristine linen suit looked suddenly damp and wrinkled. We thought the doctor was trying to push unnecessary pills on her. We made a parent's judgment call. You cannot prosecute us for a decision we made 25 years ago. She is alive, is she not? Look at her, she is fine. She is alive because a housekeeper found her and paramedics used a defibrillator on her chest, Nola corrected sharply. And we're not just talking about 25 years ago. We're talking about last Tuesday. Leaving a vulnerable adult experiencing a catastrophic medical emergency to board a flight constitutes severe criminal negligence. Nola held up her tablet. As a mandatory reporter, I have officially filed a comprehensive report with State Adult Protective Services, detailing decades of medical child abuse and the recent act of reckless endangerment. A formal criminal investigation has already been opened by the state. Law enforcement will be contacting you shortly. The words hit the room like a bomb. Criminal investigation. Law enforcement. The very things this family feared more than anything else in the world. Public scandal, legal ruin, and a permanent, undeniable label of being abusers. Rowena began to sob hysterically, clutching Thaddeus's arm. Thaddeus, do something. Call the lawyers. They cannot do this to us. Our reputation. The country club. But Thaddeus had nothing left. His money, his booming voice, his expensive suit, none of it mattered against a mountain of irrefutable, documented medical data. He was cornered. The trap had slammed shut, breaking his legs. But the execution was not quite over. Because Vesper, the golden child, finally realized that the sinking ship was about to drag her down with it. A criminal investigation? Vesper shrieked, her voice hitting a panicked, shrill frequency that made my monitors spike slightly. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at the burn on my chest. She was looking frantically at her mother, then at Declan, who was staring at her family with undisguised disgust. You cannot have a criminal investigation. Vesper yelled, stepping toward my bed, completely ignoring the massive presence of Lachlan beside me. Are you insane, Maeve? Do you have any idea what this will do to my business? My public relations firm just signed our biggest client ever. If my name is associated with a criminal abuse scandal, they will drop me immediately. You are ruining my entire life because you are holding a grudge over some stupid paperwork from when we were kids. Even now, even when faced with the undeniable fact that our parents had left me to die, Vesper's only concern was her brand image and her corporate contracts. She was truly her parents' masterpiece. A hollow, beautiful shell filled with absolutely nothing but greed. I looked at her, the golden child, the woman who had demanded $30,000 from me in extortion money less than 24 hours ago. I felt the cold, calculating logic of the actuary slide perfectly into place. Your biggest client, I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming. You are referring to the massive $2 million corporate rebranding contract you just signed on Monday, correct? Vesper stopped screaming. She blinked, her perfectly manicured hands dropping to her sides. How do you know about that? I only announced the contract signing in my private newsletter. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a mathematician who had just balanced the ultimate equation. I know about it, Vesper, because the client you signed with is Apex Global Innovations, I said smoothly, watching her eyes widen in shock. And Apex Global Innovations is a direct subsidiary of the massive corporate conglomerate where I serve as the Senior Director of Risk Assessment. The silence returned, but this time, it was heavy with absolute dread. Vesper's jaw went slack. My entire job is analyzing risk, Vesper, I continued, leaning slightly forward against the pillows. My job is to find liabilities that could harm the corporation's public image or financial standing and eliminate them before they cause damage. When you posted that terrible, defamatory rant on Instagram, falsely accusing me of faking a medical emergency, and when Juniper tried to extort $30,000 from me on a recorded phone line, you created a massive, undeniable liability. Vesper began to shake. Maeve, what did you do? I did my job, I said coldly. Yesterday afternoon, right after Juniper called, I compiled the audio recording of the extortion attempt, screenshots of your defamatory social media posts, and a summary of the pending criminal investigation against our parents. I attached them to an official internal corporate risk assessment file. I paused, letting the devastating reality of my words sink into her brain. I flagged your public relations firm as a high ethical risk and a severe liability to the corporation's public image, I stated, my voice completely devoid of mercy. I submitted the file directly to the executive board. They reviewed the evidence this morning. No, Vesper whispered, shaking her head frantically. No, you could not have. That contract is my entire business. I took out massive loans to hire staff for that account. If I lose it, I am bankrupt. I reached over to my tray table, picked up my phone, and tapped the screen to wake it up. Check your business email, Vesper. The corporate legal department sent the official termination notice an hour ago. They're invoking the morality clause to void the $2 million contract immediately. You are ruined. Vesper scrambled for her designer purse, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her phone twice before finally unlocking it. She stared at the screen. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She let out a guttural, horrifying sob and collapsed to her knees right there on the hospital floor, surrounded by sterile medical equipment. She had built her entire life on a foundation of lies, stolen money, and fake images. I had simply run the numbers, found the structural weakness, and pulled the single support beam that held her entire fake empire together. The collapse was absolute and mathematically perfect. Thaddeus, seeing his golden child sobbing on the floor, completely broken, finally snapped. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer, pathetic desperation of a man who realized he had lost everything. Thaddeus fell to his knees next to Vesper, but he did not look at her. He looked up at me. The great patriarch, the man who had ordered me around like a servant for 3 decades, was kneeling on a hospital floor, begging. Maeve, please, Thaddeus pleaded, his voice cracking, tears finally pooling in his eyes. But they were not tears of remorse for nearly killing me. They were tears for his bank account and his country club membership. You have to stop this. Retract the risk assessment. Tell the social worker it was a mistake. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot send your mother and me to jail. You cannot bankrupt your sister. We are family. I looked down at him. I felt absolutely nothing. The well of empathy I had reserved for this family had dried up completely, leaving behind a barren, scorched earth. Family, I repeated, tasting the word on my tongue. Is that what we are? When I was paying off $80,000 in loans while you bought her a luxury car, was that family? When you forced a 9-year-old girl to suffer terrifying cardiac episodes because you did not want her labeled, was that family? I leaned forward, ignoring the pull of the wires on my chest. I locked eyes with the man who had stepped over me. You did the math, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. When I was dying on that kitchen tile, you ran a risk assessment in your head. You weighed the value of my life against the cost of missing a first-class flight to a party. You calculated that my life was worth less than a luxury plane ticket. You made your choice. Thaddeus openly wept, reaching a shaking hand toward the bed rail. Lachlan stepped forward, blocking his hand with a heavy work boot. Well, I just ran my own numbers, I said, leaning back into the pillows. And I calculated that your value to my life is exactly 0. The debt is settled. The account is permanently closed. I looked past my sobbing parents to where Declan was standing near the doorway. The wealthy fiancé looked completely horrified. He had just watched the perfect, classy family he was about to marry and to be exposed as a den of criminal abusers and extortionists. Declan looked at Vesper, who was still wailing on the floor about her ruined contract. He looked at Thaddeus, begging like a cornered rat. Then, slowly, deliberately, Declan reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. He did not say a single word. He walked over, dropped the velvet box directly onto Vesper's lap, turned around, and walked out of the hospital room without looking back. The engagement was over. Vesper shrieked, clutching the box, sobbing uncontrollably. "Get them out of my hospital," Dr. Freya said to the head nurse, her voice filled with absolute disgust. The head nurse pressed a button on the wall. Within 30 seconds, 3 massive hospital security guards entered the room. "Sir, ma'am, you need to leave the premises immediately," the lead security guard said, grabbing Thaddeus firmly by the arm and hauling him to his feet. Another guard gently but forcefully lifted a hysterical Vesper from the floor. Maeve, please." Rowena screamed as the guards escorted them backward out of the room. "We are your parents. We love you." "If you loved me," I called out after them, my voice carrying clearly down the hallway, "you would have bought the beta blockers." The heavy wooden door swung shut, cutting off their screams. The silence rushed back into the room, thick and peaceful. The awful, stifling energy they brought with them was entirely gone. Lachlan stood by the bed, staring at the closed door for a long time. Then, he let out a massive, heavy sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for 6 entire years. He reached out and gently patted my shoulder, careful to avoid the wires. "Well," Lachlan rumbled, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his rough exterior. "That was incredibly efficient." I looked at my brother, the exiled mechanic who had dropped everything to sit in a hospital room and protect me from the monsters we called parents. "It was just basic math, Lachlan. You eliminate the liabilities to protect the asset." "And what is the asset?" he asked softly. I looked at the monitor, watching the steady, strong green line of my heartbeat. "Me. I am the asset." 3 days later, they wheeled me into the operating room. Dr. Freya performed the surgery herself. She made a small incision just beneath my left collarbone and implanted an internal cardiac defibrillator. It is a tiny, incredibly sophisticated piece of machinery. It monitors my heart rhythm 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If my heart ever decides to go into chaotic fibrillation again, if it ever tries to stop beating, the machine will instantly deliver a targeted shock to bring me back. I have a machine living under my skin that will do the one thing my family never, ever would. It will stay in the room, it will catch me when I fall, and it will absolutely never leave me to die. I was discharged on a Tuesday, exactly 14 days after I collapsed on that Italian marble floor. I did not go back to my expensive apartment in the city. Lachlan drove his massive, loud pickup truck right up to the front entrance of the hospital. He loaded my bags into the back, helped me into the passenger seat, and drove me out to the industrial side of town. I bought a small, beautiful house just 3 blocks away from Lachlan's repair shop. We have dinner together almost every single night. Sometimes, we do not even talk. We just sit on his porch, drink bad coffee, listen to the distant hum of the highway, and enjoy the profound peace of not having to perform for anyone. I finally have a real family. It is just the 2 of us, but it is built on a foundation of solid concrete, not lies and PR spin. The fallout from the hospital room was absolute. The State Adult Protective Services investigation moved incredibly fast, fueled by the undeniable physical evidence in the pediatric file and the testimonies of Dr. Freya, Nola, and the hospital staff. Thaddeus and Rowena were formally indicted on charges of reckless endangerment and criminal negligence of a vulnerable adult. The local news picked up the story. The wealthy suburban country club, terrified of bad press, immediately revoked their membership. Their pristine reputation was completely, irreversibly destroyed. They are currently awaiting trial, bleeding money on expensive defense attorneys who cannot argue with 25-year-old medical documents. Vesper's public relations firm officially filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. After Apex Global Innovations dropped her due to my internal risk assessment, word spread quickly through the corporate grapevine. No legitimate company wanted to hire a PR director whose family was embroiled in a highly publicized criminal abuse scandal. Without Declan's wealth to support her, she was forced to move into a tiny, cheap apartment. She posts occasionally on social media, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of a luxury lifestyle, but everyone can see the cheap lighting and the fake designer bags. The golden child finally tarnished. I put my hand over my left collarbone sometimes. I can feel the hard, solid outline of the defibrillator pressing against my skin. It is the most loyal thing I have ever owned. They kept telling me I would live. They said it when I was 9 years old and fainting in gym class. They said it when I was 34 and dying on their kitchen floor. They used the fact that I survived their horrific abuse as undeniable proof that they were right to abuse me. But surviving what your toxic family does to you is not proof of their innocence. It is only proof of how much unimaginable weight you can carry before someone finally chooses to help you set it down. Someone chose a nurse with a kind voice and a steady hand. Someone chose a brilliant doctor who refused to ignore a 25-year-old paper trail. Someone chose an exiled brother who made a silent promise in an emergency room 6 years ago and kept it. The chair beside my bed is not empty anymore. And it never, ever will be again, because I finally learned the brutal, beautiful difference between the people who share your blood and the people who actually show up. That is my complete story. 14 days, one dusty manila folder, and the mathematical precision of a woman who finally balanced the ledger. Some distant relatives still occasionally text me, calling me cold-blooded and cruel for completely destroying my sister's future and taking my own parents to court. What do you think? Did I go too far, or is this a fair and just price to pay for 25 years of abandonment, abuse, and near-death experiences? Thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and like this video to empower those who are suffering from toxicity within their own families. Never accept being a victim. See you in the next story.